Do you ever feel that you have to be more or extra because of your like race and or your gender? And if so, how have you like reacted in those situations?
Yes, the answer is yes. Is that, while I don't dwell on it on a day-to-day basis, being different, representing your entire community in organizations from either a gender standpoint or a race standpoint has pressure that you don't really think about. And so I credit it in some ways for my drive, that whole competition of like, I'm not going to lose, I'm going to succeed. But I definitely have felt like I can't trip. I cannot trip. I'm running and I cannot trip because if I trip, that
Everybody's
might be it
watching.
for me. And whether that's real or not, I think some of that is like perceived and some of that is real.
Mhm.
But that definitely, there is a pressure. And so it's driven me. I think it's driven me as I've matured in my career now, trying to settle into I'm enough. Like I've done enough. I can look back now in the history of my career and the different companies where I've had consistent success and say, I've done enough. And I don't have to be on have that pressure of like, you have to kill it at every single moment. I'm trying to settle in to being like more vulnerable about my weaknesses, about my fears, accepting failure, all those things, like not being perfect. But I do think that we have been conditioned in some ways. It's not my fault. That's kind of the conditioning
Yeah.
of working in a male dominated industry or working in an industry where there's not as much diversity at any given time.
Yeah. Makes sense. I want to talk about WOCAN some, right? So I've heard you before speak and talk about, what, you created WOCAN or you founded it with a few other ladies, Patrice Banks, Amanda
Yeah,
Gordon, and Erica Wells, right? The
yeah.
four of you came together in 2020. And whose idea was it? Was it you? Did you reach out to these other ladies? Were the four of
I
y'all
would love
talking
to take full
about it?
credit. But I don't know. I feel like it kind of organically happened. I mean, it was interesting. So we had all known each other,
Okay.
some of us more than others. We had interacted. Let's say, Eric and I saw each other at a conference one time.
Okay.
And, when you're a Black woman on an agenda for a conference, you're like an endangered species. And so when you see one other time, you're looking at that person like, where did you come from? And that was Erica and I. We're literally looking at each other like, where did you come from? Amanda and I met kind of in similar ways. I was at a conference speaking, she was in the audience. And so Patrice, I had seen and was just like, wow, a Black woman as running a service repair
It's not
shop. And
well.
so, yeah, you just like, you don't see that very often. And so we had all kind of known each other in that way. When 2020 happened, the world was turned upside down with COVID. Then we had George Floyd that happened, a few months after that. And so it was just this crazy time. But what had changed for me in terms of my identity in the automotive industry, see, I had talked about women issues for many years before that. I was a part of Women in Automotive as a board member, on all the women's issues. But what I never touched was my race because that was a lot more controversial to touch upon.
Mhm.
People, I don't know if I want to go there. It's like talking about religion. And so I had avoided it because it was safe for me to avoid it, right? To be in the automotive industry, I wasn't going to touch something controversial. And then George Floyd happened, and all of a sudden there was this piece of me. And being Black mattered more to me at that moment than being a
Mhm.
woman,
Yeah.
right? Like that
Yeah.
part of my identity was the most important part. It was the concern in my life. It was something that was at the forefront. On top of that, the industry was talking about race relations, like for the first time. Automotive groups I saw make posts and OEMs. And so, I almost felt I had the permission now to address that aspect of my identity. And so we got together just randomly on a call one day, and
Mhm.
we all were expressing our frustrations and talking amongst each other as founders about things that we would never talk to our colleagues about because they
Mhm.
just couldn't understand. And in that moment, we were like, you know what? Like, we actually need this network because we can talk about women issues with certain groups and we can talk about but from a race standpoint, we can't talk about our full identity. And we also felt like within automotive, there were groups that focused on women, there were groups that focused on minorities, but women of color were kind of slipping through the cracks in both of those groups.
Hmm.
And so we decided to launch it. And we really launched it for ourselves to have a network, to have safe discussions, to give each other advice. We thought there would be 30 women total. And 2 years later, we're at 600 members.
Isn't it
Uh,
crazy?
Right. So it's provided us a level of hope, because I think sometimes when you're the only one in an organization, and in most organizations I have been, you kind of assume that your organization the rest of the automotive industry is like that. Like there's no one else out there like me. And the reality is that while there's not enough, we're only 6% of the automotive industry, we do exist. And
Hmm.
so WorldCan has been just a great opportunity to bring these women together, to have these discussions, but also to engage with our allies. We actually have ally members that are women, white women, that are men, who also want to learn and want to connect as well. So it's really been a gift on both sides, from women of color and also engaging with our allies.
Yeah, that's awesome. When race and these conversations came to the forefront, there's kind of some conflicting feelings on it because one, you want to get excited because, right, like people are recognizing, people are
Right.
talking, and you see, speaking of allies, you see people that say, I might not have experienced this. This might not be my reality in life, but I am on your side. And then the other conflicting emotion is when you see people who really hid their hatred really well,
Yes, yes.
right? Like, because I feel like you saw a lot of that.
Oh my gosh. 2020 was just a revelation. And it was also, I mean, there was a lot of pain there too, though,
Yeah,
for
yep.
me, because I had navigated automotive. And the truth is, like, I had built a lot of connections with people that looked different than me.
Mhm.
And I had made it at a high level. Like, I can't complain all day about my automotive career. I've been very blessed despite some challenges. And so in that moment, all of a sudden, I just felt more on my own for the people that I had marched with other women.
Mhm.
And I remember when we launched WOCAN, I have never received so much like hate emails and social posts in that time of launching WOCAN. And so I had to really come to grips with the fact that, me talking about my women issues was much more acceptable than me ever talking about any challenges I've had with race. And I've had to kind of be okay with that. Be okay with people not necessarily understanding, and that's okay. But I've also been very thankful to be able to have these real discussions with many of my white colleagues in automotive to really help them understand where we're coming from. It's not necessarily like complaining all the time, but there are some real truths and realities. One example I typically give is that, in the automotive industry, there's about 1,000 dealerships owned by women, which is not enough, right? 1,000 out of what, 18,000 dealers are owned by women. That is very low. Well, you might not know that of that 1,000, 70 are women of color. Like I said, I'm all about the women issues. I'm going to be in women's groups and I'm going to support that. But I also think it's important for us to be intentional and be focused sometimes.
Mhm.
Because if we're only talking about women, but we're not dissecting other identities
Yeah.
and challenges that are different, you're going to end up leaving some behind.
Yeah, for sure. So since you have started WOCAN, like what's inspired you the most?
Yeah, I think, so there's a couple things that we focus on when it comes to WOCAN. And the very first thing is hope and inspiration. If you can't see it, then you can't be it. And a lot of our members are the only ones in their organizations. They're the highest ranking women of color in their entire organizations. And so that can be a very lonely thing. You just think you're by yourself. And so we try to get stories of women at OEMs, at dealers that have made it to GM, at suppliers, at all sectors of the automotive industry to show that despite the challenges, it is possible to navigate to the top of the automotive industry. So hope is a big part of it. The other part of it is the network. We talked about like one inspiring thing is just me meeting a Latina woman that owns a service repair shop.
Mhm.
Didn't know one prior to WOCAN. Meeting these women in different sectors that I didn't know existed. Having these conversations and meetups where I can have real conversations about our challenges. And then also education and resource. Like, how do we level these women up? Because what we know is that working in the automotive industry, you can attract diversity, diverse talent, but
Mhm.
keeping them is a whole different story. And what
Yeah.
we find is that diverse talent oftentimes gets burnt out. They don't feel like they have the playbook, and I didn't feel like I had when I joined the automotive industry. Just even like from a gender standpoint, from a culture standpoint, I'm learning this playbook of the corporate world and how do you navigate it and what are the right things to say in meetings and things like that. And so we're trying to give education, workshops, to help our members level up, but also resources. We give scholarships, for entrepreneurs. We're trying to give money to start new businesses.
Mhm.
And so all of that are ways that we're being very intentional in not only offering hope, but also giving like tactical resources that help them navigate their career and have longevity in the automotive industry.
Yeah.
So my
Well,
hope, I guess I didn't answer your question though. My hope, I mean, the hope is just looking out. We had a luncheon in October and we had 80 women of color in this luncheon, and we actually had some allies as well. And I have never been in a room in automotive in which there was more than five of me. I literally my 25-year career. So that inspired me. Like it was like, whoa, this is like a historical event. And so I want to figure out how do we take the what we've done with WOCAN and how do we insert it within the automotive industry. My job this year is to replace myself. Like I don't want to be the token on all of the panels and all of the events. Like
sure.
I actually want to take some of our WOCAN members who are super talented, have amazing stories, and like pull them up and get them on those stages. Like that's absolutely my goal.
That is what it should be. Build and develop, right?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Because then you multiply. That's
Yes.
awesome.